He didn't write any of his speeches. His dissertation was plagiarized. Those in his inner circle, his speechwriters, were themselves communists. Stanley Levison was a treasurer for a communist front group in New York. Bayard Rustin was a communist. He's the one who taught Martin Luther King the strategy of nonviolence. He was a concoction.
I want to welcome you to The Question, where we do a deep dive into information and statements that have been made where many people find to be true or controversial. And the best way for us to do this is by asking questions. I'm your host and guide, Theron King T. Washington. Now, I want to make you aware that there will be times when my insight comes from a biblical perspective. Let's jump into it. How do King's views differ from other Christian pastors like Joseph H. Jackson, for example?
Dr. J.H. Jackson, head of the largest Negro church organization in America, the National Baptist Convention USA, with nearly 7 million members, has warned constantly that communists are directing the revolutionary activities of the radical black power.
There were other people like Joseph H. Jackson who believed in the fundamental Christian gospel, not the social gospel, not liberation theology, the fundamental Christian gospel, the inerrancy of the scriptures, the resurrection of Christ. Like, he believed in those things fundamentally.
What is your feelings toward the new black theology?
Those of us who are Christians, we don't believe that you can have a theory of God based on color.
When I look at someone like a Joseph H. Jackson, he argued that to the extent that the white man doesn't give you a job, it's incumbent upon you to build your own businesses and to hire your brother and your sister and your neighbor, that you aren't begging someone else for a job. And so he didn't only talk about this, but he exemplified this. There were a bunch of sharecroppers in the South who were getting cheated by farmers. Jackson was the president of the National Baptist Convention. The convention bought 400 acres of farmland in the South, and they allowed these black sharecroppers to work the land for free. And to the extent that they raised money for their crops, they got to keep and pocket that money so long as they were saving that money to buy their own farmland, so they can move from sharecroppers to farmers and not have to depend on anybody else for their daily bread. The convention, under the behest of Jackson, did many of these things.
I don't believe.
When you look at his engagement in civil rights, it wasn't this same brand of civil rights that MLK was pushing, in that we vest certain unconstitutional powers in the federal government, which widens that power and, in a sense, usurps our rights as Americans. Because, you know, to Bob Woodson's point, we shouldn't have given the federal government the right to force businesses to integrate. Rather, we should have merely taken away the state's right to segregate.
Was MLK's solution for the problem America faced with integration unconstitutional?
Integration was never our goal. We never saw integration as a solution to the problems. We were seeking desegregation. And I think confusion on that point has continued to erode the collective self-confidence of the black community today. So integration was never an issue for me or for many others, but it was the issue that I think separated me from the civil rights movement.
Both the problem and MLK's solution are unconstitutional, says Bob Woodson, says Barry Goldwater, and many others, even Malcolm X, ironically.
Why did Malcolm X disagree with King's stance on integration?
Any effort to force integration upon whites is actually hypocritical. There's a form of hypocrisy involved. If a white man puts his arm around me voluntarily, that's brotherhood. But if you hold a gun on him and make him embrace me and pretend to be friendly or brotherly toward me, then that's not brotherhood, that's hypocrisy.
Why did MLK get kicked out of the National Baptist Convention?
Now, the reason why I bring up Jackson in comparison to Martin Luther King is because, as you know, Ebenezer Baptist Church was under the umbrella of the National Baptist Convention. Martin Luther King, fresh out of Crozer, very young, very ambitious, he wanted to be the president of the National Baptist Convention. He was overwhelmingly rejected, and it got pretty contentious. Someone was pushed off a stage and died. Someone from Martin Luther King's little ilk pushed this young man off the stage and he died. So it got pretty contentious, and they ended up kicking Martin Luther King and his friends out of the National Baptist Convention. This was before his face was plastered on Time magazine and all the rest of it. So what they decided to do at the suggestion of Stanley Levison was start a new Baptist convention, which would rival the National Baptist Convention. So they started the Progressive National Baptist Convention. Of course, it didn't take off. It didn't do anything. So they started this Southern Leadership Conference. And then they moved from there to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and its concoction was the result of the fact that Martin Luther King and his campaign was not popular to these Negroes in the South as much as Joseph H. Jackson, who was a continuation of the kinds of things that Booker T. Washington talked about. Martin Luther King wanted to move the National Baptist Convention into a new, more radical, if I can use that word, social gospel, and to get away from the kind of fundamental gospel that Joseph H. Jackson and his ilk was preaching.
If you enjoyed hearing me ask questions and then having them answered by experts in their field, let me know by giving me a thumbs up. And if you have a question you want answered, please leave it down in the comment. Until next time, stay up, stay blessed.